nothing overrides talent, right? There's just some guys that have just got that extra something when it comes down to closing the deal, right? The guy's a big game player, like a Jeff Gordon, Bill Elliott, stuff that you've done. Again, you and I probably would have fought back and forth and stuff like that, but we'd have won a lot of races. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, I have always believed when people say, look, you can always slow a guy down and teach him to be committed or teach him to be whatever, but you can't take a slow guy and make him fast.
Ray, good to see you. I just saw you just a little bit ago at the SVRA race, and where was that? Sebring or Road Atlanta?
Sebring. Yeah. Always good to be with you, Paul. It's cool stuff. Cool car you were doing there. Pretty awesome. Like to seeing what you're doing. You're always doing something cool.
I'm trying to keep up with you, but let's talk about your driving career a little bit. I mean, a lot of people don't know that you started out as a driver. You wanted to be a big time driver, but an injury right away. You had a big crash, and I didn't know this. You had a skull or a spinal fracture, and then also damaged your eyesight. I didn't know that. I just thought you wore thick glasses.
In reality, I did drive. I did drive a lot. And I came to the piece. Even though a injury ended my career, I was very lucky because we were right on the verge of those basal skull fracture time with no Hans and whatnot. So very, very, very close brainstem wise that day. But I look back and think ultimately, hey, as much as I wanted to drive, I'd never been as good as you guys, right? Like I'm a good driver, but I was good for the average short track guy, right?
Yeah.
But being able to learn and go to IROC and being around guys and then getting the opportunity to work with Jeff again, I still feel great. And, I got to test some IROC cars. I got to do a lot of things and meet a lot of great people. But that injury haunted me for a long time. Head injuries, it was a matter of years before, being out of the car, before some of my proper vision came back, depth perception, things like that. It was years before I could even catch a baseball again.
Really?
So things like that. But again, really, really lucky that day that it wasn't worse than it was.
So it happened at Flemington Speedway. Is that a fast track? Is it like short track? Because the cars back in those days when you were racing, I mean, those stock cars, late model cars, I mean, there wasn't really much to those things at all. The seats were, I remember looking back in the day when, Dale Sr. and these guys, and even Alan Kowicki that you worked with, you look at the seats back then and they were just like a little butler seat in there, and you'd crash and the whole thing would just bend away, Yeah,
so Flemington, really cool. It was this fantastic dirt racetrack for years. And then they decided to pave it. So they decided that they're still going to run dirt cars on pavement, right? So we had these dirt cars, where you sit in the middle of it. It's kind of like a USAC Silver Crown car with a body on it.
Yeah.
And we had a 440 cubic inch engine limit. It had to weigh 2,500 pounds with a driver, pure downforce. So Flemington was a pretty flat track, almost looked like a square, 5/8 of a mile. And I held the track record there for a short time, at a 16 flat, like a 16.01 something, average better than 130 miles an hour. And, we would just fly around those places. I mean, fly with these dirt asphalt cars. They were just wicked, wicked fast. But when you crashed, man, you crashed hard because it was an inside and an outside guardrail. So it normally involved two good hits.
Is the track still around?
No, it went away sometime in the 90s, like many of the other famous racetracks. I think it's a shopping mall or something now. But some of the greatest drivers in the world, especially from the dirt side, they used to run the USAC cars there, sprints, midgets, modifieds. Guys like Billy Pouch, a big winner there. You know, they brought in, you know, I mean, some of the big names like, you know, Bentonhausen and Puncher Carter and people like that all raced there. And even back in the early days, you know, guys like Ted Horn and people like that ran there. So really, really famous racetrack. I think it started running in the like the 1930s.
This podcast is brought to you by Racer and Racer.com, the leading motorsports news and information source in North America. With special thanks to trusted silver and gold trading partner and studio sponsor ITM Trading and Scottsdale-based Apex Motor Club. I'm a member there. It's a membership-only private track racing community right here in Phoenix. If you want to go racing, that's the place to be. So you're saying it was square. So was it kind of similar shape to Indianapolis? You know, like if you had guys like Pancho Carter and those guys, those are Indy guys going there, and 130 mile an hour average speed is flipping fast for, you know, that's a fast track.
Yeah, and you know, being square, you actually it was square, but you'd run it like a circle, like a skid pad. You know, like if you were at start finish line, you were up against the outside guardrail, shoot into turn one and about clip the inside guardrail, slide all the way up between 1 and 2 and almost hit that guardrail, then back down, you know, into 1 and 2 to exit whatever the little backstretch was. Because again, it was a square, so you ran it like an oval, or sorry, like a circle, and you weren't really wide open around there all the way around, but you were never out of the throttle, and really didn't use any brake. It was just it was incredible the way, you know, the guys that were really good there on dirt and pavement, it was fun to watch. But as I said, you know, when you took a really neat deal, I remember when they brought the NASCAR modifieds in there, and I haven't run with those guys in a while because I'd switched over to the dirt stuff, and I got in and they were all running around down the bottom. I'm like, where were those guys? This track's 90 feet wide, you know, and it didn't take long from when they see the rest of us that had been running there using the top and then dipping down across. They picked up pretty easy, but it was a really unique racetrack, old covered grandstand. And it was one of those racetracks where the people have been going for years. So like on a Saturday night crowd, there were generations of people there.
Yeah.
It was fun, you know?
So you've worked with some of I see it by all these helmets in the back. I mean, you've worked with some of the greatest drivers there is on a long-term period, like Jeff Gordon. You were with Jeff forever with all of his success. I mean, you worked with Alan Kulwicki, who's one of the greats of NASCAR. You worked with Bill Elliott and you're still probably one of your best friends in the world. When you see these guys, I mean, obviously Jeff has the most championships. I mean, he came out of sprint cars, and I was just talking with Jimmy Johnson, and I mean, there's certain guys that they just have it, right? When you were a team owner, would you go for the it guy or the hardworking guy?
Again, a lot of it just depends. There's so much that you have to do, right, to make it. And nothing overrides talent, right? There's just some guys that have just got that extra something when it comes down to closing the deal, right? The guy's a big game player, you know, like a Jeff Gordon, Bill Elliott, you know, stuff that you've done, you know, again, you and I probably would have fought back and forth and stuff like that, but we'd have won a lot of races. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, you know, I have always believed when people say, look, you can always slow a guy down and teach him to be committed or teach him to be whatever, but you can't take a slow guy and make him fast.
Well, I mean, that raises a question that I'm going to ask, because I just had a long conversation with Jimmy, and he had said that I didn't think I was that good. I just outworked everybody. I out-trained everybody. I outworked everybody. I was, you know, with my crew all the time. Jeff Gordon, I mean, he was the guy, right? Like, he was coming out of sprint cars, kicking everybody's rear end every single week on Thursday Night Thunder. He had the it factor going on where you knew this guy, that Jeff was quick, right? Jimmy kind of came out of nowhere. He was most famous for having a crash at Watkins Glen where he lost the brakes, right? And then, you know, Jeff and Rick Hendrick said, okay, that's the guy, right? But he's like, do you agree with that? When you saw Jimmy, was he the guy, or was he a guy that was going to outwork everybody?
I think Jimmy's right. I don't think anybody expected Jimmy to be and do what he did, right? But I think a lot of people knew, Jimmy was so talented with the off-road stuff and just so talented, good work ethic, good guy, really got it. That the stuff he was driving and running okay in was probably stuff that shouldn't have even been running okay. And the
Yeah.
fact that he was able to win in that, he just he didn't have great stuff, but people could see something in him. And, that's something I will always give Rick Hendrick credit for. Rick Hendrick, Rick Hendrick can just see stuff in people that they don't even see in themselves and identify that and then give them the tools to become what they are. He did that for Jeff. He did it for me, and then Jeff, like a driver, if you see a guy on the racetrack, whether a guy's any good or not. Like there's been some guys I've said to Jeff, like they're doing pretty good, guys that are winning races. And Jeff will go, yeah, he's not that good. I'm like, what? He's like, yeah, no. And then he'll say something about this other guy and he'll go, that guy's going to be good. If he does this, this, and this, he's going to be good. So they can see that. And I think finally, Jimmy had that talent and he got in the right stuff with the right people, got partnered with Chad Knaus, who's one of the most committed people on the planet. He got in the Hendrick organization, and then he took that commitment, and it just took what a driver needs to do to another level. And Jimmy, if he surprised himself, I know he surprised a lot of other people, but it wasn't just a commitment. Jimmy's got an incredible, I call it a feel for a car that, when you drive a car, there's a transition, right? There's a transition, right? When you're going straight, there's a transition when you've got to make that turn. In that split second, like millisecond, your brain, butt, whatever you want to call it, has to either have confidence in that or know exactly where to put that car. And you can feel how much you can turn it, how much you got to, you can't teach that. And Jimmy had an incredible ability to feel a car on the right rear, more so than I think anybody. Jeff had that same ability, but off the right front. Jeff could feel it, but Jimmy had an unbelievable feel off the right rear. And when these guys started driving these cup cars off the right rear versus the right front, Jimmy just killed them.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that being said, I mean, obviously Rick, Mr. Hendrick saw something in you because, you interviewed for the job, and I've heard you tell this story. He wanted you to be the crew chief, and you didn't want to be the crew chief, and you're like, I don't want this job. And and he was like, no, you're taking this job. And you didn't even want the job, right?
I didn't think I could do the job. I didn't want to be I was a good car builder, good chassis guy. I was, I wanted to be behind the scenes making the chassis calls. I didn't want to be on the radio. I didn't want to be leading a bunch of people. I'm like, I can't do that. I don't know how to do that, because I rock all those years. I worked with the guys, but we didn't talk on radios or anything. Jay did that, So I'm thinking, I don't know how to do this. And I remember Jeff really wanted me to be the crew chief. And Rick said, Jeff wants you to be the crew chief. I said, I don't want to be the crew chief. Hire Andy Petrie. Andy Petrie's a good crew chief. And he said, no, you're going to be the crew chief. I said, I don't want to be the crew chief. He said, well, that's the only job I've got. Take it or leave it. But he saw, he was patient with me. He knew that I would study. I watched race after race. I studied strategy. I understand most of the cars I had worked on to that point, Paul, had no fenders, right? So I had to learn all about aero and whatnot because people think, oh, well, Ray was in for a long time. I moved out of modifieds, dirt cars, sprint cars, all that stuff over into NASCAR. And I was only at Alan Kowicki's for 3 weeks, right?
Yeah.
And then Jeff and I started running the Busch car, and I only did 10 or 11 Busch races. And the next thing you know, I'm a cup crew chief. It's like, and it felt like I was way over my head.
So your talent really, when I look back and I look at you and I look at guys like Adrian Newey and I look at certain engineers, they're like, you're like an eyeball engineer. You can look at something, and I've heard you say this, that, back in your day, you'd go to the track and test, and you went to test with a saw and a welder. And you'd look at stuff and you say, okay, we're going to move that pickup point up a 1/4 inch. You'd be an eyeball engineer. And that worked in those days.
Yeah, because there really wasn't, there was some data out there when the first Pi systems and stuff came out, but it was really difficult to read and, couldn't really trust data and whatnot. But I knew enough, I a lot into, I don't want to say front end geometry, but how front end works and vehicle dynamics and whatnot. Because people go, well, where's the roll center? And what's this? I said, I don't care. Well, why are you worried about that? Let's, well, you don't have your camera right, or, so I was, in, I'm not an engineer, not a great engineer, did not go to college, but I do feel like when it comes to vehicle dynamics, things, I work with you and I work with Jeff, but in people, but when you're explaining something to me, I think my ability is to see what you're telling me, and then understanding how the car is working and how the weight is changing per wheel or the circle of traction and all those things. So when we went to the racetrack, we didn't always have PI systems. It was very expensive, and you always had to bring an engineer for you, and it was just difficult and slow things down, So we did a lot of things the old way. We put our own indicators on shock absorbers, and we certainly we weren't picking up wheel force transducers or anything like that. Had a minimal amount of aerodynamic stuff, but did a lot based on tire wear and driver feel, lap times, tire temperatures. We put, cameras around the car and see how the tires and things were moving, and really worked hard to make our cars very consistent from car to car, suspension wise. That's not saying our Martinsville car was like our Speedway car, but all of our Speedway cars were the same, short track cars the same, so that Jeff felt weekly like he was driving the same car, so he could really relate better to us. And I loved it. It's just, again, it's one of the things I still like to do. We still go to the track and play around. I'm not a guy who loves being around the shop doing a bunch of paperwork, but I love going to the track and working on the cars. And back then, that was when the owner serviceable rebuildable shocks came out, and everybody had shock dyno. And we killed them in that area.
Well, that's
too.
I grew shock dynos and shock dynos and shaker rigs and all that kind of stuff is to me is still kind of a it's a black art. It's not something that just a normal guy can engineer or figure out. And when we first started using shock dynos and shaker rigs, we'd come to a test session. It happened hundreds of times. Like, oh, we were on the shaker rig and we got this new shim stack and it's way better, and you put it on the car and it's crap. It's terrible, right? Just like, and I think, when I see you, you seem to be one of those guys where there's not a magic fix or one magic thing that's going to give you a bunch of lap time. It's 100 little things, doing all the little stuff right. That's probably what's most important. Where at least there was a time period where people just seemed to think there was some magic setup, right?
Yeah, and I think they still do, but in reality, if you always go back to blocking, tackling, we talk about the shocks and the shaker rig. Well, the one good thing about getting PI system data, it would give me the shock speed around the racetrack and shock travel and speed around the racetrack, so where your shock piston was in the body and what the frequency was, and you're like, you don't really need a shaker rig to figure that out. Where it's spending the most time where he's having a problem, you can adjust. But it still comes down to the guy that's sitting in the seat and steering the car. It doesn't matter what the computer says. Like if you don't give that guy what he wants, the car's not going to be as fast as whatever the computer says to do anyway. And I think early, some of this data and stuff they've got now, it's amazing, right? And it's been, they've got it sorted out, and it's spot on. But back then, a lot of the data and a lot of the stuff that we were getting wasn't necessarily true, right? It wasn't necessarily true, and everybody go like, well, it says this, the tire data says this, or the air pressure says do this, and you're like, well, the driver said to do this, and that's what I think we should do.
Yeah. So, you're still an advocate of, NASCAR now, the cars become so engineering heavy, right? Like it's become, it's more expensive to run a NASCAR. It's been that way for a while than it is to run an Indy car. You got all these engineers, and you got wind tunnels and shaker rigs and pull down rigs, and, but the car is still it's spec. You can't really do any of the stuff that you used to do like, hey, we're going to cut this pickup point off and I'm going to move it over here, a quarter inch, and we're going to try that. Like you can't do that anymore because the car it's built to a spec. So now it's become so engineering based. I mean, do you think do you need the old school guys still on the teams to balance it all out, or is it all gone just completely computerized?
You know, us old school guys, I think they only need us there to tell the stories, right? We try and help people that say, it doesn't work that way anymore. And I was like, all right, well, I didn't realize that the laws of physics changed, since Apple hit Newton in the head. You know what I mean? You're like, wow, physics don't change. But, it's just a different world. I feel like if they can do it and still control the cost, opening up the human element and allowing the crew chiefs to have a little bit more adjustment to make their cars fit their drivers rather than their drivers having to fit their cars. Driver, now you go and you get in the simulator, you're out of simulator, they make these changes, and then you got to drive your car that way. Where, we used to be able to move wheels around, move aero balance around, run different, spring shocks, ride heights, whatever we want to do to suit Jeff. And I think that, the drivers that we're seeing nowadays may not be as suited as the other drivers used to be, because you get a guy like Kyle Larson that comes in, Christopher Bell, Kyle Larson, guys like that. They're so far ahead and shoulders above these other guys because they don't depend on the data. They're going to drive the car like they want to do it. And I feel like there's other guys out there that could drive a car like that, but they needed to feel, you needed a feel to go fast. Jeff needed a certain feel to go fast. Jimmy needed a certain feel to go fast. And when they started to take all that adjustment away from those guys, the career stopped being fun. And everybody's like, that guy can't drive anymore. No, that guy can still drive, but he can't drive the car that way.
Well, that's the confusing part of racing nowadays to me, because I've driven some simulators, although I haven't driven a multi-million-dollar simulator like a Chevy simulator or a Ford or a Toyota. But the guys that I've talked to that do drive them regularly say that there's something still missing, that feel of the tire touching the road and feeling that grip through the seat of your pants, up through your butt. It's not there. So, but these manufacturers now are relying, and the engineers, all these new young engineers that straight out of university, that's what they're relying on for their setup versus what, they're doing their setups now on these sims rather than, because there's no testing at the racetrack.
It's just a different world. The racing is different. We kid around a lot, talk to Rusty, Mark, Jeff, guys like that. And they're like, we hit the sweet spot when we could cut the fenders right off a car in the garage. They always go to me, do you remember that time between the morning practice and the afternoon practice? You cut the fenders right off the 24 car in Pocono. It's like stuff like that is legendary. It's like, yeah, I did. Cut it, yeah. And we just built new fenders because we felt like we had too much front down force, and we just cut fenders off. You can't do things like that anymore. Build A-frames. You talked about we showed up for a race and we had a car built with all adjustable slugs. So we could change roll centers, camber, gains, all that stuff, right there. And I remember the NASCAR inspector going, you can't do that. And I'm like, well, what? Why? And so they made us pick one and weld it so we couldn't move it. Like, well, you can't. What if you move that during the race? I was like, well, first of all, I'm not going to be changing the roll centers during the race, or camber gain. But it was, things like we did. We could move bodies forward, backward. We could turn them sideways on the chassis. Like we used to have, everything was like plus or minus a half on the wheelbase. So Jeff Gordon, people say, about Jeff Gordon. Jeff Gordon needed to feel the right front wheel. If Jeff said, I feel a little loose chassis-wise, I really don't like this. If I just put spacers in the right front, move the right front wheel out, never change the springer shock, he'd just fly. It just,
Really?
and again, Jimmy kind of the same way, but when they drop the cars on the ground, and now they're solid, right? They're just solid, and it's all about the front splitter and the rear diffuser, and it's whatever. It's taken out away from the driver and the crew chief. There's still some really smart crew chiefs out there. I mean, smart guys. And they don't have a toolbox to fix the car if something's wrong with it. You know, I watched 2-3 weeks ago, Joey Logano struggled. I'm like, Joey Logano's one of the best drivers out there. Comes from the Penske organization. He's got a great crew chief. Something in the simulation told them to do something that didn't work. And now they can't fix it during the race.
Yeah. Well, you're sitting back, you're watching, and then you decide that you want to start, revive IROC. Originally, it was called SRX, and you basically take all your knowledge and build this. I feel was like something completely out of the box, because it was kind of like a road race car, kind of like a late model, but it had a kind of a Euro shaped, kind of almost like a Ferrari body on it. And the thing made a bunch of downforce, but it was all, you didn't use a wind tunnel. You didn't use a shaker rig. You didn't have to do all that stuff. It was all just kind of eyeball what you liked and obviously what you knew. And literally we would go to all these tracks, all these, these short tracks, and we would run as quick as the late models would. And those things are set up to run at those kind of tracks. And this was like a mishmash of everything. And we're running as quick at times or quicker than what a lot of late models are running.
Yeah, those cars were really cool. They would have been great road race cars too if we'd got a chance to do that. But we wanted cars that could be good dirt cars, good road race cars, and it'd be not so great pavement car, because I didn't want the stock car guys to have a big advantage. So I feel like that's what happened to IROC a little bit. It became kind of NASCAR light. It was all about ovals, and the Cup guys would have a chance. So we tried to take the advantage away on the paved ovals. And, those cars, we had a very light left front, it was kind of a 3-wheel deal, and you had to fight, you had to, and they were overpowered, did not have a lot of rear down force, had decent side force and flat sides, so you could lean and go whatever. But, you had to monitor your throttle, and you had to save your tires, and again, on the dirt, moving around. So it was a good series. I was again proud of what we accomplished, especially the first year. It was incredible. But as with anything else, sometimes if it doesn't have the right bones, right, it doesn't have the right foundation, it kind of falls in. But it did tell me, it proved to me, proof of concept, that race fans would like to see something like that.
Well, I remember when you called me on it, and this was probably almost a year before SRX even happened, and you said, "Hey, I got an idea. Tell me what you think of this. Are you interested in, I'm going to start a racing series, kind of like IROC, but not IROC. And we're not going to run big tracks like Daytona. We're going to run on little tracks, but it's going to be a TV show. It's going to be an entertainment show that we're going to race, and we're going to run each other hard, but we're going to have some fun doing it." And I'm like, I'm game. And you told me I need some good guys, and I need some bad guys, because I need a show. And I said, well, I can be a bad guy. That's no problem.
Well, you were great. You were the first guy to sign up. We had a great year. Yeah. Were you a bad guy? Did you bend to some sheet metal and stuff like that? Yeah. But people loved you or they hated you, right? Drivers today, our stars need to be more polarizing, right? We don't need them in the middle of the road. We need the fans get excited when they love somebody or when they hate somebody. So there has to be a field of drivers that, you're going to cheer as hard against that guy as you're cheering for this guy. And that, to me, that was a success of NASCAR in the 90s, the Gordon Earnhardt deal. But then it was just as much with, Mark or Rusty or DJ, people loved them or hated them. And then, the Ford versus Chevy at that time was big. But we, I felt like we were getting 1.3 to 1.5 million people watching us on Saturday night.
That was going to be my next question was, look, we were hitting it out of the park. TV ratings wise, it was the second or third most watched racing on TV. And, NASCAR did not like it. They didn't want their stars coming and playing. At that time, Tony had his problems with NASCAR, and I think you had some problems with NASCAR at that time. I know IndyCar didn't like getting, beaten up bad in the TV ratings to this startup deal, but, people loved it.
I think they did, and I feel like we did a good service to the people, like, because a lot of the things that we did, like the drones and the way that we did in-car cameras and people talking live, going around the racetrack, that made some of the other networks step it up.
Yeah,
And
they all copied it.
yeah, and then it also, you know, had NASCAR and IndyCar think out the box a little bit more about entertainment and things. So I feel like, again, sometimes the best form of flattery is when they copy you, right? Is imitation. And so I felt like, okay, so I'm not a crazy man. I've got some good ideas. Even they're using ideas. And if you looked everywhere we went, it was standing room only, sold out. Met some great people, and I think that, again, I wasn't there for the final 2 years, but I'll bet you that everywhere that you go, you'll meet somebody who's like, man, I was there that night, and we, we were, it's like we had the Slinger. Remember Slinger, the
Yeah.
little Unchained thing? And it was like, it was the biggest thing that happened in Wisconsin, I think, at that time. Like, it was amazing the amount of people, and they cheered for everybody. And it was, it was great, and again, going to Eldora was amazing. And then Nashville, we wind up the first season in Nashville, and the place is sold out for the first time in 30 years. And it was, you couldn't even get a ticket to it. And Chase Elliott showed up. He and Bill had a battle, and it was, man, it was just,
I had a good night that night too. I think I finished like fourth that night.
Did you?
Yeah.
I can't remember, but I mean, you had some good, you had some good runs. I know that, you had, you got us more social media time than the other guys did. When you and Haley got into it, our ratings went through the roof. It's good. So no, you did. I felt like you did a good job for us, and I know that. I know there at the end it got a little bit crazy, but I wasn't there.
Yeah, you weren't there anymore. After year one, you leave. You had a falling out with, so obviously there's partners in it, and you guys aren't seeing eye to eye on how the things are going to be run. And to be honest, Ray, I mean, the whole thing changed dramatically after you were gone, because everybody that was there was your buddy that was racing, and now all of a sudden it's kind of turned it really kind of turned into something else. What was supposed to be fun and have a good time, now it became more cutthroat, because they started offering prize money to win a heat, and then bringing in guys like Kyle Busch and top level Cup guys. And it don't matter where you are, if you stick $5 in front of a driver for a heat win, he'll slit the guy's throat for $5, right? So all of a sudden it went from being fun to now it's real serious, and this is real racing now, which wasn't what it was designed to be.
Well, I said, one thing we got to remember, and this is Bill France told me this a long time ago. You got to remember, we're entertainment. Okay?
Yeah.
We're sport. It's not like it's professional wrestling where the winner's picked and it's rehearsed, but we got to remember we're entertainment. And most of the time, when people are sitting on seats, you got to entertain. As well as I do. Like, if I said to you guys, look, just put on a show, 20 to go. It'd be a great race. And I've seen so many. I watched the IROC build up, and I watched some of the failures. I've watched some of the ratings drop on other races and things, and I started to see those same mistakes being made, and you're like, look, the history repeats itself for a reason, because you don't change. So I do still think that there is a place for a form of that motorsports entertainment. We took breaks between the races, but we told personal stories about the drivers, right? And fans want to see that. They want to know the drivers. Some fans like the cars and the technology and whatever, but most fans want to see the drivers. You buy a ticket to a pro football game, pro basketball game, you're going to see the players. You want to see so-and-so play, right?
Yeah.
You want to see Tom Brady play football, or whoever played basketball, baseball. And we've always got to remember that whether it's Formula One, NASCAR, IndyCar, IROC, whatever, fans come to see the stars. And we've got to focus on those stars and entertain those people that are paying that money for those seats. And they've got to have access to the stars. You guys did stage deals. You signed autographs. You were really gracious to the people when they came in. That's what people pay for.
Yeah, I mean, after you left, though, I mean, there was something that was just kind of missing, Ray, because I mean, it didn't take very long for it to kind of unravel itself. They lost the big TV network, which was, the TV ratings, went down to a third of what they were when you were running it. And then they tried to make it more NASCARized, like brought in all the big stars, Joey, and that, which is great if they can come do it. But what I didn't like, and this was the guy who was running it, who I didn't really see eye to eye with, because I think he knew that you and I were tight and you and him were not tight. So I had an argument with him one time, and they were, they'd go and let, Cup champions like Joey and Kyle and Harvick, they'd let them go test the car at Caraway for a day. And then, we show up to the first race, me and Tony and Elio, we haven't driven the thing in a year. And these guys have come in, they got a test day, under their belt. And I didn't think that was very fair to the guys that were in it from the beginning,
Well, again, it's always a touchy situation, certainly with everything that happened in the past. But, I had my way that I felt like things should have been done and would have been done. If I was in charge, and I'm in charge of IROC right now. So things will be done this way. And those guys had a little bit different idea than I had. And unfortunately, we've all paid a financial price for that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you own the cars again. So how many cars?
So if anybody wants 14? To buy a whole series, I've got a whole series of cars.
Well, look, I know a new network here that we're on right now that might be interested in an IROC series.
We can make them a deal. We can make them a heck of a deal. I've got 16 cars and enough stuff to run a whole nother year. It's a shame. Cars are really special. And the motors that Ilmore did an amazing job for us, matching those motors and then taking care of them. That was, it was expensive, but it was one of the smartest things I think I did, was to have them match the motors, and we didn't have to worry about that. But we give you guys some good power too. Those things.
Oh, they had a lot of power. I mean,
it became about throttle management and tire management. Right? You shouldn't run flat out all the time. If you can run flat out all the time, then anybody could drive the car. And I wanted cars that not anybody could drive. Those cars were built for the best drivers in the world to show their skills in.
So if a deal came along, do you think you could resurrect that again with those cars?
Oh, you could absolutely obviously SRX would no longer exist, but there's certainly a way to resurrect that series. But I would never do it underfunded again. You've got to have the money to do things right. And, we didn't get the sponsorship that was promised us the first year. We didn't get the investors that were promised us the first year. And it was a lot of work. And obviously they didn't come the second or third year. They'd still be going. But, the lesson I learned from that is no matter how good your idea is and no matter how many friends you have, you cannot do something underfunded. It will not be successful.
Well, it's the same thing in racing. I mean, you can go run a shoestring budget, and unless you're a complete standout, and you can make it happen. But it seems like the teams and organizations with the most money are always the ones the most successful, right?
Yeah, because they're not scrapping, just trying to make it week to week. They get their stuff done, and they can be looking ahead.
Yeah. So tell me about IROC now. You've got some cars that you had some cars, some private people have cars, and tell me what's going on with IROC now.
So, love the vintage racing stuff. And if you look at the historic Trans Am and some of the historic Formula One stuff, the stuff that they do out at Monterey at Laguna Seca, pretty amazing. The Rolex Monterey Motorsports reunion. Big, probably the biggest vintage car race in the world. Maybe Goodwood is along that time, but here in America, anyway. And Bruce Canepa, Bruce Meyer, Ray Evernham, some of the folks out at Laguna, they saw what we did at Lime Rock, and so Rob Kaufman and I partnered. We got the brand, licensing the marks back. Been buying IROC cars, located about 55 IROC cars worldwide, and said, look, to get these things out going around, like my goal is to get them restored, get it going. But my only money that I can make, my business plan is buying the cars, restoring the cars, selling the cars, and then maintaining the vintage race cars for people. So right now, Laguna Seca invited us to come to the reunion. We're going there on August 13th to 16th of this year. And it looks like we're going to have over 20 cars. So what we've done is take a mix of our cars. So Jeff Gordon is going to drive, Kenny Schrader, Mark Martin, Bobby Labonte, Scott Pruitt, Danny Sullivan. They're all going to drive. And Rob and I have sold enough other cars where people are bringing cars that they have, so they get to race at the Rolex Motorsports reunion. And on top of that, you're going to get to race with a guy like Jeff Gordon. You're going to get to, race with Scott Pruitt and people that actually ran in IROC. So going to have fun. And we're looking at doing probably 3 or 4 of these events a year. And right now, Rob and I are footing the bill mostly on everything. But again, like the historic Trans Am cars, those things have gotten bigger and bigger in value. Historic Indy cars, historic Formula One cars. It's so that's the play for that. And I hope, again, my dream, if you said it right, Ray, if the genie was jumped out of the lamp, would be that one of these gazillionaires that love racing will come to me and say, we ought to start that real IROC series. And then I would say, funny you should mention that. I've got this on the drawing board. I've got a plan. I've got whatever. I do think that the ideal way to do that would be do what we were doing, Paul. What we started was kind of a seniors tour, right? Yeah. You guys were all so well known, all the years of brand building, all that. People came to see you guys. And I think that people would still come to do that. And, hey, would it be great to be able to take some current F1 guys, some current NASCAR guys, current sports car guys? It'd be great, Of course, I still think Kyle Larson would whoop everybody's butt, but that's just my opinion.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing is like there's still a huge audience for people, because a lot of these guys, like, Jeff, I mean, he retired pretty young. And Jimmy is kind of in half retirement. He's still pretty young. And like, all the guys that were, we're still, I mean, I'm in my 50s now, but I mean, I'm as healthy as I've ever been. But
go 220, right? You don't want to go 220 and you don't want to do it 20 times a year. But heck, go do what we were doing with SRX. You could still do that and you could still do it well. Jeff's 53, 54 years old, same way. Jimmy's late 40s, maybe, Dale Jr., there's, 45, 50, you still got plenty of racing left in you.
Yeah. Like you said, I mean, I know that you go to a lot of those races, and I'm amazed really when I go to these events. Like I'm running in the Trans Am, and Trans Am's professional deal. It's like pretty high dollar stuff. It's not cheap to run, but the amount of families that are there with their vintage stuff, and they're either running Formula Fords or Formula Atlantics, or they got Camaros or Mustangs, or they got old Can-Am cars, and SVRA's got a place for kind of everybody. And I mean, you'll go to these events and every part of the track is full. It'd be like 400, 500, 600 entries, and it's all just families there. The dad's driving the car, or he's got his son driving the car, and it's really pretty cool to see. And a lot of these guys with the vintage stuff, some of them have a lot of money too.
Yeah, and they run them hard, and it's it's a good relaxing weekend. Like we all still love racing, but I used to be on the road 220, 230 days a year. It's a lot, right? So now, if you want to go and have some fun, you can race half a dozen times, and if you go out, like when Bill and I used to drive for Carlos Gann, we'd go in, if it was hot, maybe you should practice. I'd be like, no, maybe you should practice. Well, I don't really want to practice. Neither one of us wanted to go out and get all sweated up, but it's fun. It's about that camaraderie. So again, I hope that we can continue to let people know about the IROC brand. The brand has a lot of power. Porsche people really still excited about the brand. A lot of the Chevrolet people because of all the years with Camaro and then on GM with Firebird. So it's I'm really excited about this whole Laguna deal. And not only are we doing Laguna, we've been picked as one of the actually the cars to represent the Rolex Monterey at the Quail. So we're actually going to drive them from the Laguna Seca racetrack about 3.5 miles down to the Quail live, so, and with the police escorts. So it's gonna be a lot of fun. We're also going to have a breakfast for a lot of the former IROC drivers to come in, just to kind of have a little of a reunion deal. And again, the fans want to come and see you guys.
Yeah. So have you been the car you built? I remember when you tried to break the speed record at Pocono down the straightaway one year we were there with the Indy cars. You still have that? You get that car out anymore? Like I don't even know what you called it, but it was kind of like a cross between an Indy car and a modified and a stock car. And I mean, it had big wings on it and front wings like an Indy car and big front tires. And I don't even. What did you name that car? I can't remember.
That's right. That's the car we call the Ghost. We've done a lot of really neat things with it. I had it out. Last year at VIR. I have a Corvette, a 2010 Corvette Trans Am car, and it'll outrun that. It's that's the car we won our class at Pikes Peak with it. We decided to go to Pocono to see, like how fast it could be. Like it's a 1936 Chevy body, but it's got crazy motor and aerodynamics, and it's just a car we built for fun. It's like wanted to build it, and it is it runs faster than the Trans Am cars like at VIR and Road Atlanta, places like that. It's run at Indy on the road course there. It's run the hill climb in New Zealand. So we took it to Pocono and we're like, let's just it was kind of a fun deal. So the whole deal was to leave pit road. They were only gonna give me one lap. Leave pit road, come back around, and the radar gun was almost all the way down to turn 1.
Yeah.
So they were like, so I had to start from a standing start off pit road, down around Pocono, hit that radar gun at 200 miles an hour. Right. So we kept working on it, trimming it out. We had harder tires on it, probably than I should have. And, we put cup tires on it and stuff. Well, the first lap, I spin going like 170 miles an hour getting into 3. You know what I mean? We had everything laid down. I spin the thing around. We'd just come shoot in there, stop back on pit road. What do you want to do? I said,
Townsend and I were watching because we were like, and then you came around turn 3 and spun, and we were like, oh, and then you went back out and did it again. So what's the fastest you've ever gotten that thing going?
Well, so we went back in the pit, stopped. I had knocked the left little air pod off. They said, what do you want to do? I said, let me go out. Well, the tire's not hot. Let's do this again. They're like, really? I said, yeah, let's go. When I came back around and hit 196, we didn't hit 200. Went into 196 into turn 1. And I'm going to tell you, my butt was so puckered. That thing was so sideways getting in there. I thought to myself, oh my God, please. When you got my feet are flat on the floor, right? No brake, no gas. And you're like, so 196, but did the same thing at Daytona, so the cars run 196 both times. They ran 196 at Pocono, but Pocono from the bus stop Daytona come out of the bus stop.
Yeah.
We were qualifying for the HSR event there. Out of the bus stop to down into turn 1 at Daytona, there's a radar thing there. So on the road course at Daytona, 196 there. So 196 both places, but it's the
HSR event, that was a road course. Did you have to get stopped for turn 1 from that? Because that's
no. I think we ran a minute 48 lap, qualified like 3rd in this big Porsche class.
It's pretty good.
Yeah.
Well, I'm impressed with that. I mean, next time you run that thing, if I'm at one of these SVRA events, you got to let me know so I can come check it out.
Send me your schedule because we drag it out. I'll tell you, if you're coming to VIR in September, we'll probably be there screwing around.
All right. I'll let you know. But listen, my friend, it was good talking to you, and hope to see you at the racetrack again pretty soon.
Always great talking to you, Paul. Hope to see you, and we need to go playing again sometime.
For sure, I'm game anytime. I'll drive anything, anywhere, anytime. So
I know you will, and drive it fast.
All right, thanks, Ray.